historic Christianity without the benefit of having Jesus explain the parables point blank, where he just tells you, this is what the parable means, these are what the analogies correspond to, etc., etc. He doesn't give us that. Instead, we're left to scratch our head and figure it out on our own, but not entirely devoid of the help of the Holy Spirit. We can look at the Yeshua's life and draw some inferences from there, but unfortunately, what we have done as Gentile Christians is we followed down a path that was motivated by this idea that Judaism must have been in need of being repaired. Otherwise, why would Jesus have to come and rebuke the religious system so harshly? You know, you get to Matthew chapter 23, and he's just throwing Judaism under the bus. The point we're trying to bring up, however, as I'm interjecting here, is that if we characterize and almost even stereotype Judaism as this meritorious work system, as this stone-cold legalism where the Jewish people were trying to earn their way into heaven by keeping the commandments and doing the sacrifices, where there's just black and white, I've got to keep the commandments because that's the only way I'm going to be saved, and I've got to keep it perfectly or I'm not going to stay saved, something to that effect. Using that Christian perspective or that stereotype or kind of caricature of the first century Jewish religious system, if we use that, then it's easy to see how that Jesus system of grace and love and genuine faith in God via his sacrifice must replace the bankrupt system of anything else. That's true. In other words, let me say it this way. To the extent that Jesus is bringing the genuine experience, the genuine relationship with God his Father through him by the power of the Holy Spirit, and that's in contradistinction to anything else that would try to purport to be a relationship with God, any other legalistic system, any other meritorious merit theology works, righteousness, anything, any other ethnic Jewish ethnocentric Jewish exclusivism, any other kind of bringing your Jewish identity before God and hoping that's going to prop you up righteously. Obviously, yes, it's only genuine faith in God through the grace of God that brings about the genuine salvation experience and relationship with God. So I agree with that. To that extent, yes, Jesus brought something, what we might say is radically new. Nevertheless, let's keep reading my commentary and gain some further insight to this. I said, nevertheless, Pastor Guzik presented an interpretation of Matthew 9:14-17 that essentially agreed with the previously examined Christian positions, right? Pastor John MacArthur, Pastor John Piper, and GotQuestions.org. I only looked at 4 mainstream Christian versions. Then I looked at David Stern's, who's a Messianic Jewish version, which we're going to get to in a second. And then I looked at Tim Hague. But we ascertained that Pastor Guzik essentially agrees with the previous examined Christian positions. And here it is, in that, you ready for it? Jesus did not come to repair Judaism, but to replace it with the new covenant. And that last sentence, in my understanding and experience of first-hand interacting with Christians, this is not something I just Googled from where I am here in South Korea. This is something I've actually lived and walked in amongst and interacted with folks while I lived in America, where I visited church after church and dialogued with people, pastors, pew sitters, people like that, and dialogued and just got their perspective. The general consensus from across the board, and it's especially in Protestant evangelical versions of Christianity, is that Jesus didn't come to repair Judaism, but to replace it with the new covenant. And thus, most Christians will say we're no longer under the law. We are not Old Testament Christians. We are New Testament Christians. We are New Covenant Christians, etc., etc. And again, if their definition of the word New Covenant or New Testament means I'm a saved person, well, then I agree with that. But if they're using it to try to distance themselves from any obligation to keep the Torah as a Christian, then I'm going to have problems with that. Understand where I'm going with that? All right, let's keep reading. Indeed, I said in my commentary, Pastor Guzik feels that Jesus came to introduce something new, not to patch up something old, and thus there would be no need for a Jew to hold on to the cultural vestiges vestiges of Judaism once he embraced the new covenant. And this, taken to an unfortunate extreme, is exactly what happened historically in early Christianity as it began to be dominated by non-Jewish participants.